Hello everybody. This video is for anyone who's trying to learn C++ and they're trying to figure out which are easier topics and which are more difficult topics. Have you looked at my website? The link is given inside the video's description box. And it's if you're trying to learn C++, then this is a pretty basic understanding of what you should get your concepts clear on. Which are the hardest C++ concepts for beginners to struggle to understand? And how would you explain them? Well, as first, when I learned C++, if I tell you that you have to get the basic concepts correct, and then you have to understand the structure of the language, like using the header files, the include files, and the source code files, and how the compiler sees these files when it compiles them. So you have to understand these basic things. And the third most important thing is how you understand your integrated development environment. So whichever package you're using, if it's a Visual Studio or Borland, which is a pretty old compiler, or any other IDE, you have to know how it is organized. Beginners to learn C++ will consistently struggle with getting a C++ program off the ground. And that goes to show that even the basic program of C++, if you don't understand these basic concepts, you can't move forward. So even a hello world can be a challenge. Why do I say that? Because in an IDE, a hello world program has three components minimum. It has the include file, it has the source file, and then there's the absolute path and the project file, and then the compiler begins to compile the whole program. Almost impossible in the beginning to understand these things. It takes time. There are 4 areas that cannot be learned by any beginner in C++ within a day or even a month in most cases. I mean, there are outstanding examples, but I'm just generalizing. These areas challenge nearly all beginners, and many cases where it can take a few months to teach. So you have to understand the architecture of an IDE, of the C++ compiler, of all the include header files, and how the basic language is organized in syntax form. These are the most fundamental things you need to be able to build and produce a program in C++. And C++, of all the languages, you have to get the syntax correct. Even one little error in the syntax fails the whole program in compilation process. So basically, these are the most fundamental things you need to be able to do to build and produce a program in C++. I'm going to go through them in a list form. Basic challenges: creating a basic program file, compiling and linking even in an IDE. That can be challenging. So all your header files, compile, source code has to be organized, and you have to have certain packages installed in the compiler. Then project settings in an IDE for C++ projects. This is one of the biggest areas where when you create a project, most of us, we forget where we save the file. So you have to be able to, and then we name the project file and we forget about the name. But we did all our source code, but the basic name, because in Visual Studio, it creates a default project name, project 1, project 2, etc. So this is a very important aspect. And then make files, scripts, environment variables affecting compilation. So these are all default settings which has to be set up. And then basic challenge number 2, using the other people's source C++ code. So when you use other people's source code, they have different settings, and you have different settings in your Visual Studio or IDE. Then going outside the SDL and using libraries. Now this is very, very important. You have to have your libraries spot on. Then proper library paths and source code file paths during compile. I can't tell you, this is the most crucial step of library paths of source code and file paths of the compilation. There is an absolute path and there is a relative path. If you get these two paths twisted, then the whole thing fails. The compiler gives you an error. So you have to know, you have to organize your file paths very carefully in your computer. Then there is the issue of static versus dynamic libraries during linking. And then symbol reference resolution. And then another challenge after that, which is the troubleshooting code. Deciphering compiler error messages. So once you run a program and you get a compiler error, you have to decipher it, like what that error actually means. And you have to go and check the error message and what that error message is implying. And the more you do the deciphering process of error messages, the better you get at understanding where you went wrong. Then deciphering linker error messages. Now there is a linker as well in C++. Resolving segmentation faults. And then the next part, actual C++ code. Now, when you get to the actual C++ code, you have to be able to write excellent if, loop, case, assign, call, set statements. Because if you get any of these structures wrong, you're going to get a compiler error in basic syntax. So your if control structure, your for loop, your call statement, they have to be spot on. And this is very crucial in coding in C++. Managing header implementation files consistently. Then rigorously avoiding name collisions while staying productive. So when you're writing source code, the variable names have to be distinct from each other. They can't be very similar. And then various forms of functional callback, especially in GUIs. Because in graphic user interfaces, you have a lot of segments of code. It's not just one source code. There's several files. So you have to call the functions callback. And lastly, how do you explain them? You cannot explain any of them in a way that most persons will pick up right away. It takes time to understand these concepts. You can describe these things in a way of analogy. You can even have learners mirror you at the same time. You demonstrate them in the end. It usually requires a lot of time in order for months and years to pick up on these things, especially the GUI coding, because GUI coding has several segments of code. It's not just one source file and a header file. There are like several files making the GUI. Well, I thought I'd make this video on what are the hardest C++ concepts to learn and what you should start, where you should begin, and how you should go about it. And you can check out my other programs on C++. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, click like, and to see more of the videos, click the red button. Ta-da from Shafi. Enjoy this video? Then must have a look at these videos.